The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 40. And now for something completely different. In a whirl of green flames, he felt himself being pulled forward. Then suddenly he stood, a little off-kilter, on the hearth of a fireplace in a small 5-star hotel just down the street from King's Cross Station. A tall, thin man with a magnificent moustache stood from behind a desk to greet him, taking an unnecessarily large and ungainly goose-step to reach Draco. He had an unctuous air about him, and Draco had always thought he seemed vaguely familiar. The man reminded him of someone he knew, but he could never place it.
"Mr. Malfoy, hello! Your compatriot came through only a few minutes ago. I believe he is in the loo, gathering himself."
"Thanks, Basil." Draco stepped forward to shake the man's hand briefly. Basil was a squib who worked at the Standard Hotel, and his fireplace served as the closest flue to King's Cross. He was an unusual man, Draco thought. He kept a Norwegian blue parrot in a cage in the corner of his office. Draco was uncertain whether the bird was dead, or rather just resting. No matter, thought Draco. Theo needed to hurry up. They would need to move quickly to meet Hermione. A door to their right opened, and Theo stepped out, his face flushed and hair slightly damp from having splashed water on himself. Theo enjoyed flue travel about as much as Draco enjoyed sidelong apparition. They both shook Basil's hand one more time and departed, briskly walking down Euston Road to the train station. Rather than head towards platform 9 3/4 as usual, however, they instead hurried to a sign on a shop labelled Boots. Hermione stood outside, a large rucksack slung over her back. She wore a green sundress with yellow flowers and brown sandals. Her hair was clipped back with the barrette he had given her. She looked beautiful, radiant, sun-kissed. Draco couldn't help himself from hurrying up to her, and nearly swept her into a kiss right then and there, but she held him off with a look. "Not here," she said warningly. "Just in case." He understood. He had told Bellatrix that he would be going out of King's Cross Station. That wasn't the truth, but it was possible that she'd sent spies to watch for him. He was counting on Bellatrix not knowing enough about British rail timetables to know which type of trains left from where. The three of them ducked inside the shop, Hermione and Theo exchanging small greetings as they went. They all took a few moments selecting several sweets and crisps, and each took a flagon of drink. Hermione's was brown liquid with a red label. Draco chose his because it reminded him of the murky, lurid green of the Black Lake lit from underneath. His drink was called a Mountain Dew, so he expected it to taste light and refreshing. Theo, being partial to orange sweets, chose something violently orange-coloured called Tango Orange. Draco insisted on trying to pay with his own money, but when the bloke behind the counter scoffed at him, Hermione stepped in to cover it. "Draco, you can't pay with a £500 note in a small shop like this," she whispered to him, chivying the two wizards to the shop's exit. "Where did you even get that? Those are exceedingly rare." Draco turned defensive. "My father keeps a small safe in the floors of his study, full of muggle money, just in case we need it. I took a handful of it, in case we had to have it." At this, he drew the notes from his pocket, showing them to Hermione. Several people walking around them openly gaped at them. Hermione hurriedly covered his hands with hers, pushing the notes into his jacket. "Draco," she hissed, "this is too much money. That's what most muggles make in a year or two. Not what a teenager carries around a train station for a weekend holiday with friends. Merlin, this is going pear-shaped already," she moaned to herself. She watched as he carefully stowed the notes away in an inner pocket, then guided them to an empty stairwell that led to some offices. "Okay, let's go over a few things. First, Theo, your jacket is too formal for this. You could wear that to the BAFTAs. Remove that and you'll be fine. Draco, we're going to need to figure out a way to change your notes. Oh, wait, you said £500 notes were too big. How about 100 or £50 notes?" "No, Most people only used tins or maybe 20-pound notes to buy things. She wrung her hands. Brilliant, then I'll... He found a 20-pound note among the pile, and with a wave of his hand over the bills, they all matched, changing to the smaller denominations. But you're underage, Hermione gasped.
Granger, no one is getting reported for that, unless they're doing it in front of muggles, Theo grumbled. Hurry up. I want to drink this orange pop thing.
At this, she seemed especially miffed, but let it go quickly. All right. Where is your luggage? She asked next. Both Slytherins withdrew their luggage from their pockets, rucksacks reduced to the size of their palms. Hermione sighed. Muggles going on holiday cannot shrink their bags, so they'll need to be normally sized for when we meet up with Eliza. At this, Theo perked up, orange pop forgotten.
Tell me more about this Eliza. She sounds delectable, he purred. She's literally only told you her name. What are you faffing on about? Draco asked sharply. Oh, that's enough to be getting started with. But seriously, are we talking...
At this, he cupped his hands to his chest with a questioning look. At their blank expressions, he moved his hands out further and tilted his head as if to ask, Here? Draco shoved him hard in the shoulder.
Piss off a minute, you wanker.
He turned back to Hermione.
What else do we need to know?
She sighed. There's too much to go over right now. It would take days, maybe weeks. Just follow my lead. If you encounter something that you don't recognize or know how to operate, just look to me. And no discussing wands, magic, beasts, or anything else from school. Eliza knows that I go to a very small and private boarding school in Scotland called Hogwarts, and she knows that you are my... Here, Hermione stopped and blushed a bright red.
I'm your...
Draco smiled suggestively, taking her waist in his hands and drawing her close. Noticing Theo leaning in to watch from his step a few down the stairwell, Draco turned to him with a hard stare.
Fine,
said Theo, throwing up his hands and turning around, away from them.
You have 30 seconds.
Draco moved one hand to the back of Hermione's head and brought her lips to his, opening his mouth at once to taste the divinity of her tongue. Her hand reached down to grab his arse through the thin fabric of his golf shorts and pull him close to her. Fuck, she was amazing, he thought. His other hand found her bum, the seam of her knickers just delectable through the thin sundress fabric. She rubbed herself on his body just a bit. He moaned involuntarily.
Hem, Theo said, turning back around. That's quite enough.
They separated, both flushed, and straightened their clothes quickly. They left the stairwell and made for the exit out of King's Cross. He carried his rucksack in front of his trousers for a few moments until everything had settled back down. They found a large group of arriving university students just exiting a platform, and blended into them in hopes that if anyone was watching for them, they would lose them. Then it was just a short walk to St. Pancras Station, where they would travel to Sandwich. "Eliza!" Hermione called as they neared the second station. A tall, well-built blonde girl with 2 long braids turned to them, smiling broadly. She was round and soft, with huge blue eyes. If Theo had moved his hands another bit out from his chest, he still might not have gotten close, Draco thought.
"There you are, Miney. I was worried you and your boys had done a bunk. Hello, Eliza."
Theo had stepped in front of them, reaching to take Eliza's hand that wasn't holding her rucksack, and bringing it to his lips, kissing it once and then caressing it against his cheek. He looked deeply into her eyes and said, "As if there was a chance in hell that I would allow Granger here not to introduce us. Merlin and Morgana, you are about the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen." Eliza blushed a pretty pink and giggled wildly.
"Merlin and Morgana? Are they mates of yours? Aren't they from that King Arthur story?"
Hermione interrupted before Theo could utter another word. "Yes, Eliza, just a silly way that some of our classmates talk sometimes. How are you doing? Have you had a good summer so far?"
"Yeah, it's been nice. But I think it's about to get a lot better,"
Eliza answered, and Draco felt that Theo might have met his match. The four of them turned into the station and found their platform, Draco with his arm around Hermione, and Theo holding his arm crooked to allow Eliza to hold on to it. Once on the train they found 4 seats facing, and spent the next 90 minutes or so in fast conversation. Eliza seemed to accept that Theo and Draco did not know much about films and television, which suited her just as well. Her parents did not like television, and didn't allow her to go to very many films. She also seemed unfazed when they had not heard of the bands that played on the Muggle wireless. She and Theo did have a long conversation about Jurassic Park, a movie they had both seen, and because Theo had been friends with Blaise for several years, he was able to carry on a decent conversation about pop culture, politics, and books. At some point, Hermione needed to use the loo, so Draco decided to walk with her. They took their time getting back, finding an empty luggage compartment to snog in for a few moments. When they returned to the seats they'd come from, they found Theo and Eliza wrapped in each other's arms, kissing fiercely. Draco and Hermione kept walking and found 2 seats in the next car. They sat, holding hands and snuggling each other close, at times talking about school, classmates, or events from their past, or just kissing. It was such a freeing experience, Draco thought, to go somewhere that no one knew your name, or feared your house guests, or cared about what your father had done. Once in Sandwich, the 4 took a taxi to the Royal St. George Golf Club. Draco had come here once before with his father and Cornelius Fudge, just before Fudge was made minister. That had been a cold, blustery day when Draco was 9. Now, more than 7 years later, it could not be a more different experience. The sun blazed overhead. A gentle breeze came off of the ocean. The girls in their sundresses and matching tam-o'-shanters looked like an advert for golfing. They golfed 9 holes, with Eliza in the lead, no surprise, considering that she golfed for her school team. Then they stopped for lunch, each enjoying the lamb chops, niçoise salad, and red wine. After they finished their round, Draco was pleased to see that he finished a close second to Eliza, though he thought there might have been a bit of luck involved, or a bit of magic. He noticed that Hermione had casually waved her hand at 1 or 2 of his shots, to keep them on the course. They took another hired car to the hotel, a lovely bed and breakfast in a renovated castle. Eliza was suitably impressed, although but for the modern Muggle appliances it seemed much like Draco's and Theo's homes. They had steak with peppercorn sauce, fingerling potatoes and haricots verts, with creme brulee for dessert. Once dinner was concluded, the 4 sat in the drawing-room with an older couple from Roermond, in the Netherlands. They talked for an hour or so, sipping cognac or whiskey, and feeling wonderfully sated. When Eliza suggested going to bed, Theo beat a hasty retreat up the stairs, pulling her behind him. Draco raised his brows at Hermione and said, "Are you ready for bed, darling?" She met his eyes evenly and said, "Of course." They said good night to Emily and Julien, the Dutch couple, and made their way slowly upstairs to their room, Hermione leading the way. Once inside, with the door locked and warded, Hermione asked shyly, I just need to use the WC a moment." He pulled her close, holding her tight round the waist, and murmured into her hair, "Of course. I'll be waiting here for you. I don't want to spend a minute longer than I must without you." She disappeared into the loo, and Draco took stock of the room. A tall bed was in pride of place in the centre, covered with what seemed to be far too many pillows. 2 small lamps were at each side of the bed. He fumbled with one until he figured out how to turn it on. Then he realized the light was too bright, and used a spell to dim it. He repeated the task for the other lamp. Next, he removed about 8 of the pillows from the bed, leaving a modest 2 pillows behind. He drew down the sheets, took off his shoes and socks, and did a cleansing charm on his breath, popping in a spearmint lozenge for good measure. Now, where to stand? Or should he sit? On the sofa or the bed? Would the bed be too presumptuous? Should he lie on the bed?
Oh, that would definitely be too presumptuous. He was just debating leaning against the writing desk versus the wall when the door to the WC opened. Even in the low lamps of the light, she seemed to glow with a warm, soft light. She wore a simple nightdress that skimmed the top of her thighs. Her skin was beautifully sun-kissed and soft like velvet. She walked slowly to him, and he could tell that she was nervous, struggling to hold his eye contact. For his part, he could not look away, even if commanded to do so. He was afraid that he might even just blink, and she'd pop into non-existence like a daydream. She neared him, and the scent of gardenias overcame him, bringing with it memories of his precious moments with her over the years. "Hello," he breathed. "Hi," she said shyly. "You look magnificent," he said, breathing picking up measurably as she neared. "You look overdressed," she smiled. Draco reached behind his neck without breaking eye contact, and pulled his shirt over his head in one quick motion. He tossed it to the side quickly, and his hands, which had been gripping the front of the writing desk behind him for steadiness, reached for her tentatively. "That's better," she said, with a little laugh. Her hands reached up to his shoulders and drew his lips down to hers, pressing herself up into him. Her arms came around his shoulders, running softly down his chest, scratching lightly at his skin. He held her waist, marveling at the softness and smoothness of her skin. She was warm, pliant, beautiful. He pulled her close to him, feeling her body through the thin silk of her nightdress as she rubbed her body lightly against his chest. He brought his hands up and around her body to touch her tentatively, lightly. "Hermione, I've wanted this for so long. I've never done this before, with anyone." "Then we should make it count, because I haven't either," she said. He knew, no matter what else happened in the coming days, weeks, maybe even years, that this night was one that no amount of occlumency would ever fully erase. Chapter 41. Every little thing she does is magic. Tonight would be no less than perfect, he knew. He was in a beautiful castle, far from home, where no one knew him, with the gorgeous witch that he adored. He kissed her, pulling her to him. Her warm, soft skin under her nightdress felt like smooth velvet, and the feel of her in his arms was electrifying. As she pressed against him, he knew she could feel exactly how much he wanted her. "You make me nearly mental, just thinking about you, Mai. I don't know what I would do without you. You drive me spare with your gorgeous lips, your eyes, your mind, your soul. You are everything to me." His nerves and excitement had him wanting to tell her everything on his mind. She smiled against his neck. "You're suddenly so talkative." "You've given me something to talk about," he whispered into her hair. They crossed to the bed, and she lay down on the duvet. He crawled up to rest next to her, their ankles intertwining. Draco's eyes roved over the length of her, pausing in surprise to take in the sight of her toes. "How are they? They're green." At his look of delight, Hermione giggled. "What?" she wondered. "Your toes, well, your toenails. They're green. I've never seen such a thing. Do pureblood witches not paint their toenails?" she asked, amused. Well, I'm really not sure. I've never—" At this he stopped. It dawned on him that he'd never seen a witch's bare feet to even know. "I like them. They're pretty," he said. She smiled at him. "I picked the color for you." "Come off it. I know green's your favorite color," he teased. "You're right," she said, and he kissed her once more. He pulled back slightly to look her in the eye. "You're certain about this? About us?" he asked. Now that they were here, alone, together, he had to hear it from her lips. "Draco," she said with a nervous smile, "being with you has been an adventure,
and this is just the next step for us. I care so much for you."
He surged forward, certain now. They were both nervous, that much was clear, but both of them were sure that there was nowhere else each of them would rather be than here, and no one else they'd rather be here with. They were inexperienced, at times fumbling, but they figured things out together. There were a few awkward moments during which they smiled sheepishly at each other, but the fact that they were discovering this whole new world together made the moment transcend all that came before it. As their bodies and souls intertwined, he looked her in her beautiful copper eyes, staring directly into her very being, and she looked back into his with so much love and hope. Silver met copper, and he hoped that she could understand from his eyes how much she meant to him. "My, you're so beautiful. God, you're amazing. I'm so happy that you're with me. I can't do this, any of this. I can't live my life without you." Merlin, he was talking again, and his mouth was moving ahead of his brain again. I love this. You're so beautiful."
"Draco, you're so good to me," Hermione said, and Draco could only marvel at her here tonight. The physical and emotional sensations they were feeling built to a fevered pitch, and after only a few moments they flew over the edge of reason together, flinging themselves over the precipice with abandon. It was the taut, drawn-out, final chords of a symphony of beauty. She collapsed against him, her cool skin meeting his heated body, snuggling herself to him. His arms came around her, holding her tight, unwilling to let her go, even for a moment. "Hermione, I'm so—" He had no idea what he was going to say to finish this sentence, but he knew what words were fighting to make their way out. But a part of him did not feel as though now was the best time. He didn't want her to think that he only said them because of what they had just done. "Draco, the contraception charm."
She suddenly sat up, grabbing his wand from the bedside table and pointing it at her stomach. He placed his hand on hers as she muttered the incantation, and there was a brief warmth. At this, she looked into his eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to use your wand. I think mine is in the lab." "It's all right. But that was amazing, that it worked so easily for you," he marveled. He had tried using the wands of a few friends over the years, and most were reluctant, if they ever worked at all. Only his mother's wand had worked nearly perfectly for him.
Well, I didn't realize. Harry's works well for me, but I suppose you're right. I have tried a few spells with Parvati's, and they've never worked perfectly."
Their eyes met again, two metals, well matched, beaming at each other. Hermione slipped off the bed, and Draco did a few quick cleansing charms, then pulled up the sheets over himself. She returned a few minutes later, her usual gardenia scent stronger than ever, but now competing with the smell of mint.
"Sorry, my parents are dentists. If I go to bed without flossing and brushing, I feel guilty,"
she explained sheepishly. "What are dentists? And what is flossing?" Draco asked, now slightly more awake than he'd been a few seconds before. She explained, and he was fascinated. "So you don't use a tooth-cleansing charm? Little ones are taught that around the same time they are taught to dress themselves in the wizarding world," he answered.
"Muggles have come up with ways to get around nearly everything that magic provides. Well, except apparition and time travel. That's only on the telly."
"The A-Team didn't time travel, Hermione," he mumbled, half asleep.
"Yes, well, it turns out you don't need a TARDIS to time travel anyway. Just a necklace and a request from Professor McGonagall to the Department of Mysteries head," she said,
nearly asleep herself. Draco's eyes flew open, suddenly very awake. "Wait, what?" Hermione's revelation about her third-year adventures in time travel took Draco by surprise. It explained so much about her constant odd appearances all over the castle that year.
Thus began a lengthy discussion about time-turners and time travel, which turned into a discussion about whether or not Hermione was nearly a year older than her actual age, which turned into a discussion about whether or not she was technically of majority age already, which turned into a discussion about how magical children aren't supposed to use magic outside of school, which turned into a discussion about how pureblood children are given more magical leeway than muggle-borns, considering that children are encouraged to not use magic until they're adults, but no one seems to care unless it's done in front of muggles. In other words, the muggle-born's extended family and friends. Which turned into a discussion about how the magical community treats people and creatures that it views as less than themselves. Which turned into a discussion about house elf rights. Which turned into a discussion about Dobby, Winky, Tiffy, Pym, and Creature. Which turned into a discussion about Star Wars, and how much the house elves reminded Hermione of Yoda, because now she was quite loopy, what with it being after 3 o'clock in the morning. As they drifted off to sleep, Draco felt content and happy in a way he'd never thought possible. Tonight had been like a dream, one he hoped he never had to wake up from. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.